to do. So tonight, as we jump in here and we continue in this in the life of Moses and his meeting, let's jump in tonight. Let's look at Moses' mother. And I want you to see Moses' mother. I want you to see that she was a woman that was determined to save her son. A woman determined to save her son. In Exodus chapter number 2, as we jump in here, beginning, let's read the first 10 verses of this chapter. It says, "Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and she saw that he was a fine child, and she hid him 3 months. And when she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes, daubed it with bitumen and pitch, and she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood at the distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. And while her young women walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. And she took pity on him and said, 'This is one of the Hebrew children.' Then his sister said to the Pharaoh's daughter, 'Shall I go and call a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse your child for you?' And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Go.' So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Take this child away, nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages.' So the woman took the child and nursed him. And when the child grew older, she brought him to the Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses because she said, 'I drew him out of water.'" So here as we look at this passage and we see the birth of Moses, we find out that, even in this law that the Pharaoh had made, that he said, hey, if you see a baby Hebrew boy, just throw him in the water. When Moses' parents, when they saw Moses, they knew something was special about this kid. Now, being a parent, you understand, when your kid's born, everybody looks at their kid like, hey, this is the most beautiful baby in the world, right? Everybody thinks that. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think babies are good looking. Sorry, so I don't work in the nursery. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think all babies are good looking. And when people, they come and they're like, hey, the kid looks like the dad, or hey, the kid looks like the mom, I don't see it. I just see a scrunched up little face and all that. I don't see anything. But man, when your kid's born, I'm like, this is the best looking baby ever. Looks just like its dad. No, I'm just kidding. But you're different with your own kid, right? Your kid's special, right? And your kid's doing this, and you're like, man, my kid does this. Nobody else's kid does it, right? My kid's just special. They're a prodigy, and everybody thinks their own kid looks special and looks like there's something in them. But here in this passage, as they're looking at Moses, they're looking at him, and they're like, there's something about this kid. There's just this aura about him, if you will. And they said, we just can't do it. Even if it costs us our own lives, we can't do it. We can't throw him into the river. And so they hid him. How in the world they hid a baby for 3 months, I have no idea. With all the crying and the screaming kids do, I have no idea how they were able to hide this kid for 3 months. But they were able to hide Moses there for 3 months. But eventually, it was impossible. They just weren't going to be able to do it anymore. But still, she just couldn't do it. And so she basically said, I'm going to do whatever I can to try to save this kid's life. And so she built this little basket, and she waterproofed it the best that she could, and she stuck him in the river. I mean, technically she did what she's supposed to do, right? She put him in the river. She put him around the bulrushes among the reeds and let him just kind of float. And then Jochebed said, hey Miriam, go and follow the basket. Let's see what happens. And so she trails through the bulrushes herself, and along the banks of the river, she follows this basket as it floats down. And, you think this is the Nile River. This is not just this is not Brookville Lake. There's, alligators and things in this river. And they followed along, and as fate would have it, right? The Pharaoh's daughter just happens to be down there bathing. And they see this basket in the bulrushes, hiding in the bulrushes. She sees this basket, and she's like, hey, what's that? And so they go and get it, and oh my goodness, there's a kid in there, and the kid's crying, and she has pity on this kid and wants to keep it. And so Miriam then steps up, and she's like, hey, if you're going to keep this kid, maybe we should get one of the Hebrews to come and to nurse it and to raise it. And Pharaoh's daughter says, hey, that's a good idea. Go get somebody for me. And Miriam goes, and she gets Jochebed, Moses' mom. And she brings him in there, and so the Pharaoh's daughter says, hey, I want you to take this baby, and I want you to nurse it and raise it until it's weaned, and then you'll give it back to me, and it'll become my kid. And is this not, as Rod Dimmons likes to say, is this not a God thing? Not only does she save her kid, she doesn't have to kill him, but now she's getting paid to raise her own kid. How many moms want that gig, right? She's getting paid. That's something only God can do. Why? Because God had a purpose. God had a meaning for Moses' life. And there was a reason why he was being spared his life. There's a reason why you've been spared your life. I don't know all of your stories. I don't know where you come from. I don't know if you've had any near-death experiences or anything of that nature, but you have breath in your body today because God has a meaning and a purpose for your life. And through all of this, God saves Moses because of a mother who was determined to save her son. And God was taking care of him. And it just, I'm just reminded of Matthew chapter 19 and verse 26 that says, hey, but Jesus looked at them and said, with a man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. It seemed impossible that she was going to be able to hang on to Moses. But with God, all things are possible. And he was able to bring something that was very bleak and grim and to be able to save his life and to be able to make this grand design for her to be able to raise her own kid. Jochebed didn't know what would happen with Moses, but she knew that she couldn't just kill him. There was a meaning for his life, and so she put him in a basket and just hoped for the best. So here's my question for you. What decision do you need to put in a basket of belief for the Lord? What kind of situation might you be facing that seems very bleak and very grim and like there's no hope, but maybe you just need to put it in a basket of belief and in a basket of hope and just say, God, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I'm just going to put it in a basket and just trust you to take care of it. What decision do you need to put in God's hands tonight? As we continue in the story, I want you to see Moses now distinctly raised. Moses distinctly raised. In Exodus chapter 2 and verse number 10, it says this. It says, when the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son, and she named him Moses because she said, I drew him out of the water. Here's what the website behindthename.com says about the name Moses. It says it's from the Hebrew name Mosheth, which is most likely derived from the Egyptian mes, meaning son, but could also possibly mean deliver in Hebrew. The meaning suggested in the Old Testament of drew out from the Hebrew is probably an invented etymology. And so there's a little bit of discrepancy maybe in what the true meaning of the name Moses means, and people had these different thoughts to it. But here's what we know, is that God had Moses drawn out of the water and distinctly raised to eventually deliver his people from their bondage. And so whatever his name means, whether it means drawn out or whether it means deliver, they're both technically right because that's what God wanted with Moses' life. God had a plan. You see, God had a special plan for Moses, which neither the princess nor the Pharaoh knew. They had no idea that 80 years later, this child who should have never have seen his first birthday would have come back to deliver the Hebrews from their Egyptian bondage. You thought about that? He should have never seen his first birthday. But God raised him up, and 80 years later, he would come back with a vengeance, if you will. He was able to be raised by his mother, but he was also in the house of the Pharaoh, and so he has this very distinct upbringing there. And no doubt, I'm just sure of this, that Moses' mother, Jochebed, taught Moses all about his Hebrew roots and about the God that they served, and that she would raise him to know who God was. And so I began to research the name Jochebed, and Jochebed, it implies this meaning of glory of Jehovah, or it means Jehovah is our glory. Jochebed is the first person in the Bible with this compound that has the Hebrew word Jah in it, which stands for Jehovah, associated to her name. And honestly, I'm not sure there's a more fitting person to have that honor, to have her name associated like this. Jochebed had 3 children that we know of in Scripture. She had Miriam, the daughter, then she had Aaron, and then she had Moses. And all 3 of her kids played significant key roles, if you will, in the pages of Holy Writ. The book, All the Women of the Bible, says this about Jochebed. And this is a lengthy quote, but I just wanted to insert all of this because it's just such good information. This is what it says. It says, to Amram and Jochebed were born 3 children, each of whom became renowned in their own sphere. She bore and suckled all three on the same strong milk till she weaned them from milk and put them on the marrow of lions. The oak has its roots around the rock, and the children of Jochebed had their roots around their godly mother. Jochebed's prominent place in the divine gallery is secure then, and the aspect of her career especially emphasized in Scripture is that of her clever design to preserve the life of her baby boy. It was for her courage and trust in such an act that had far-reaching consequences for the nation that she is placed among the heroines of faith in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 23. If Jochebed was guided by God to make that small cradle and place her 3-month-old baby in it and hide him among the rushes, surely the steps of Pharaoh's daughter were ordered by the same God, even though she was an idolater. It was to her that Jochebed owed the saving of her son, as well as the royal protection and all the advantages of Pharaoh's palace as his home for the first 40 years of his life. How long Jochebed lived after she delivered the child, we are not told. Doubtless she was dead by the time Moses fled into the wilderness when he was 40 years of age. Although she did not live to see how famous her children became, dead, yet she spake again in their utter devotion to God. She had lived her life as unto him, and her sons and daughters lit their torches at her flame. Jochebed was the chief influence unto God in their preparation for the great task they were able to accomplish in leading out his people out of Egyptian bondage. It was Jochebed's love, faith, and courage that saved her from a cruel death, that saved her child from a cruel death, and preserved him to bless the world. A mother who loves the Savior and who has a more severe anguish when she knows that not the life of her child is at stake, but its soul, can rest in the assurance that Jochebed's God still lives and is able to save her dear one from eternal death. I mean, this simple act of this woman to save her child's life is something that is just incredible to think about. And so here Moses, he's able to be raised by his Hebrew mom, but he's considered the son of the Egyptian princess. Because of this distinct upbringing now, Moses, he grew up in the palace, he dressed royally, he was given the best education, and Moses, because of his mother's upbringing, he knew about the true God and that the Egyptian gods were empty, false idols. And when he was older, he began making the right choices that had eternal values. So Moses had this very distinct upbringing, again, that would all eventually play a role in the meaning for Moses' life and in the purpose that God had for him. Every little piece of this puzzle is being put together and ordained by God. Let's move on here tonight. Let's look at Moses now in his decision, disgrace, and his departure. His decision, disgrace, and departure. In Exodus chapter 2, now verses 11 down to verse 15, this is what it says. It says, one day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and he looked on their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. Now notice the wording in this, and I believe every word of Scripture is God ordained. It says he went out to his people. Although he's being raised in the Egyptian palace, again, he knows his roots. He knows where he came from. And he's associating himself with the Hebrews. And it says he went out to his people and he looked on their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. And he looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hit him in the sand. And when he went out the next day, behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? And he answered, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid, and he thought, surely the thing is known. And when the Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh, and he stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Here at the age of 40 years old, Moses decided that he just couldn't wait any longer. And again, we mentioned last week, I feel like maybe Moses, he was probably raised, and I just can't help but think that maybe Moses had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. Again, just trying to figure this out. Like, why am I alive? Why am I here? My people are out there, they're being beaten down, but I'm eating the good food in the palace. I'm sure that kind of messed with him a lot. And it probably bothered him a little bit. And this idea even that he was being raised in a palace, but he knew who his mom was, he knew where she was at, but he wasn't allowed to be with her, and he wasn't allowed to have those relationships with her. I'm sure that stuff kind of bothered him and kind of put this little chip on his shoulder. And so one day he just kind of snaps, if you will. And he goes out there and he sees this Egyptian beating down the Hebrew and things. I'm sure that wasn't an uncommon thing. I mean, it was slavery. It was hard, and they were hard taskmasters. But for whatever reason, he just couldn't take it this day. And he snaps. And he had looked either way, and he thought that he had gotten away with it, and he killed this guy. He buried him. He stuck him in the sand in here. And listen, here's the thing, and here's the craziness about it. Moses made the right decision to choose the eternal rewards rather than the earthly treasures. That was the right decision. He chose his people, the Hebrews, rather than the pleasures of sin for a season. He chose that. Now, he went about it in kind of a bad way. I think we'd all agree with that. But he snapped. He made a split decision. He killed this guy. He thought he got away with it. But then what happens is the next day he sees two Hebrews fighting. And so he goes, he tries to break it up. And again, why this guy's always in the middle of danger and conflict, I don't know. But he's there. And so he steps into this situation because he just can't sit back. And he's like, why are you guys fighting each other? And so then one of them spouts off, what, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? And then he's like, oh, I thought I got away with it. I thought I'd stuck by that. And so then he was scared. And he's like, man, if these people know, surely word's going to get out. And the Pharaoh's going to hear about it. And the Pharaoh's going to want to kill me. And so he runs. He departs from the land. And he goes on his run. And so he flees to the land of Midian. He was disgraced because he knew he made the wrong decision. He was disgraced because of what he had done. So now think about it. Put yourself in Moses' shoes now. Again, you don't know why you're even alive. You should have never survived. You're raised in the palace. You know your Hebrew roots, and you're just trying to figure out life and what the meaning and what the purpose is. Then you snap, you kill a guy, and now you're on the run for your life, and you're thinking, why am I here? Surely this is not where I'm supposed to be. Surely this is not the way that my life was meant to be. But yet, as we know the story of Moses, we know that, again, God was orchestrating all of this. And God was putting the pieces of the puzzle together for his life. And although maybe he was questioning his meaning in life and all of this, God still had a plan for his life. So then we step into the next phase of Moses' life where we see Moses disengaged with life. Moses disengaged with life. He's think about this, he's 40 years old. He's old. He's not really old. For those of you at 40, I'm sorry. He's 40 years old. He's alone. He's got no family. He's got no kids. At this point, he's got no job. Seemingly no purpose for living. And so he runs. He's got to get out of Egyptian authority. And so he travels to the land of Midian. I looked this up. So how far did he run? Midian, it's a long way away. It's like 285 miles away from Egypt. And you think about this. There's no planes, trains, or automobiles. So he flees 285 miles away to the land of Midian to get away from the Egyptian authority and from anybody who would know him or know, that he was a wanted man. And we pick up in the story there in Exodus chapter 2 and verse 15 that we read there, but it said he went to the land of Midian and it said he sat down by a well. Verse 16, it says this, now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and they drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but again, Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. And when they came home to their father Reuel, he said, how is it that you've come home so soon today? And they said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and even drew water for us and watered the flock. And he said to his daughters, then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. Verse 21 says, and Moses was content to dwell with the man. And he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. And she gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. And God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant with Abraham and with Isaac and with Jacob. And God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Chapter 3, verse 1 says, now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. So here what happens is he flees, he runs some 285 miles away, he sits down at this well, no doubt to rest and to get some water, try to figure out what's going on, where's he going to stay, where am I going to sleep, and all these things. And it just so happens that these group of girls come and they bring their flocks to water them for the day, and while they're there, shockingly, trouble occurs, and Moses is there again. And so these shepherds come, and they begin to harass the women, they begin to harass their flocks and trying to drive them away and all this. And so Moses steps up, and Moses is able to take care of the situation. No doubt, I'm sure the part of that had to do with the fact of his Egyptian upbringing. It was part of his education, if you will, was he would have been trained to fight in what was the most powerful army in the world at the time, the Egyptian army. So Moses, being a well-trained fighter at this time, is able to take care of these guys, no problem. Again, God putting all the pieces together. And so these girls come up, again, God putting them there at the right time, the right place. Moses takes care of the situation. He stands up, he defends for them, he goes ahead, he helps them out in their chore of watering the flocks, and then the girls go home. You know, it's like a half day's work for them now, and their dad's like, hey, how'd you get home so quick? And they're like, man, there was this Egyptian. Notice the wording. Not a Hebrew, but an Egyptian. And here he's so far away from home that people don't know who he is. He doesn't have that popularity anymore. He doesn't have the fame of being Moses, the Pharaoh's princess's adopted son. He doesn't have that story behind him. He doesn't have anything there for him. But here, this is what Matthew Henry's commentary says about Moses here. It says, wherever the providence of God casts us, we should desire and endeavor to be useful. And when we cannot do the good that we would, we must be ready to do the good we can. And he that is faithful in a little shall be entrusted with more. Moses, again, can't find meaning for his life. He can't figure out what's going on. He's been disgraced. He's departed his land. He's lost anything and everything that he's known. He's now in this foreign land with no family, no connections, no jobs, nothing. And God puts this together for him. And Moses steps in, he saves these girls, he goes ahead and makes himself useful and helps them. And then their dad's like, hey, why don't you bring them home? And so Moses says, yeah, I'll go home, I'll work for you. For what? Just to make himself useful. To putting himself to work. See, sometimes in life, in the way the seasons of life go, sometimes we're put into situations that maybe are not ideal for us. But that doesn't mean that God can't still use you in that situation. If you don't mind a personal illustration, several years ago when we were in ministry in Ohio, just some hard times hit the church and things, and so the church had to take me and move me from a full-time position to a part-time position there at the church, and which obviously meant I needed to go and find a job to supplement our income and things, and so my wife, she worked at a place called Pioneer Automotive. If you heard of Pioneer Stereos, TVs, things of that nature. That was the company over there in Ohio, and their factory was hiring, and so I went and applied for this job. They're a pioneer in the factory. I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't want to do the job. I didn't want to work there. Be honest with you, in my pride, I thought to myself, here I am, a man with a college degree, and I'm working in a factory. It just didn't, for me, I was prideful, and I didn't feel like that was where I should be. I wanted to be in ministry. But that wasn't what was happening at the time. And so I was beginning to prepare for that job. It was either the morning before or the morning of that I was starting that job, which, by the way, was 7 years ago this week that I started that job. But either the morning before or the morning of, God got a hold of my heart. And he showed me in Scripture that whatever you do for the Lord, or whatever you do, you're to do it unto the Lord. And so God got a hold of my heart, and he said, Steve, if you're going to work in this factory, he said, you're going to do it unto the Lord. So I went into the job. We had about 4.5 days of training, and that Friday afternoon, we finished our training, and they took us out onto the floor of the factory to start working on, the job was building stereos. We would build the stereos, and then once stereos got built, they'd ship them off the car companies, and they would put them in your Hondas and Toyotas and things of that nature. And so they put us out on the floor that Friday afternoon, and the line that they were showing us to work and things, it was kind of slow that day, and so there wasn't a whole lot of work. And so all of these employees, new employees, there was a big group of us, so everybody just found themselves just sitting around, just talking, just chatting, because there was really no work to do. And as I was standing there, God hit me with this thought, Steve, you're here to work for the Lord. Get busy. Make yourself useful. And so I went, I found a broom, and I just started sweeping. Just started cleaning up, just making myself useful, working. End of the day came, we clocked out. As I was clocking out, one of the managers from the factory stopped me, and they said, hey, we noticed that while everybody else was sitting down, you were working. You were making yourself useful. You were sweeping in the floors. They said, we like that. We said, we think you're going to be a good fit for a different line here in our plant. And so what ended up happening, this factory where they built the stereos was not climate controlled, so it was hot in the summer, cold in the winter. There was cardboard boxes, so there was just cardboard dust all over the place, and just not really a clean place to work and all that. But what happened was, because I decided to make myself useful there, the manager saw that, and they said, hey, we're going to put you on the Lexus line. And so they moved me, starting that Monday, they moved me and put me on this Lexus line where I went from being in that factory that was not climate controlled and very dirty and all that. I went to a dust-free environment that was climate controlled. I had to wear gloves, had to wear a hat and all that to work and different things in a very clean environment. The Lexus line was the top line in the company. That they only put the most experienced workers on this line. And so the way the line worked is they would put all these stereos together, and then because it was Lexus, it had to be top-notch quality. And so once the stereos got built, then they would give it to a tester, and the tester would take it into a soundproof booth, and they would test to make sure all the sound worked. They would make sure all the lights and everything was functioning right on those, and that's the job they gave me. I got to play with stereos all day. All because I decided to make myself useful. As I began to work there on that line and doing that job, I again tried to do it as unto the Lord, and so I would just do the work, and I was just pumping out these stereos as fast as I could, and things, and people began to notice that, and within a month of working in the company, the vice president of the company stopped me in the hallway one day, and he said, "You're Steve Kirkwood, right?" I said, "Yes." They said, "Hey, we're hearing great things about you up in the front office. So I just wanted to find you and just tell you we appreciate your work here." This wasn't the job I wanted. It's not what I wanted to be doing. But in this season of my life, God had me there for a reason. God had me there for a purpose, for me to work unto the Lord, to be a testimony for the Lord in this job. I worked in a factory with a bunch of people that were rough. They were rough people. And I would work, and they would cuss, and they would tell dirty jokes, and all these types of things. And I would do my job, and I would stay focused on what I was doing, and all that. And in the year and a half or so that I worked there, these people that would come through on the line, they'd get to know me. They would make these statements. "You're not like any preacher we thought that we've ever known." They're like, "We didn't realize preachers could have fun," because they had this stigma about Christianity. They had this stigma about pastors. God had me there to be an influence and to work for Him. And although maybe it wasn't what I wanted to do, it wasn't what I desired or endeavored to do, I could still be useful for God. Moses, in this situation, found himself useful in this season of life. Again, you recognize there, they called him an Egyptian, even though he was a Hebrew. So this is how far down from the social ladder he had fallen, and there from being adopted as the Pharaoh's daughter, he's now, this nobody, and he's lost all of his identity. Their father Jethro, he invited Moses to stay with him. He gave him a job there, and in verse 21 it says this: Moses was content to dwell with a man. I can't help but read that and think maybe he was just a little bit disengaged with life a little bit. Like this was just not his thing, but he was just content, just to kind of coast through life at this moment. Matthew Henry's commentary says this about Moses. It says, "Now the settlement of Moses in Midian was designed by providence, one, to shelter him for the present. God will find hiding places for his people in the day of their distress. Nay, he will himself be to them a little sanctuary and will secure them either under heaven or in heaven. But two, it was also designed to prepare him for the great services he was further designed for." Again, God had a plan for this season of his life. And God was going to use him. Even though maybe he was disengaged with life, he was learning things, and God was using him in this moment. And God kind of took him away from everything, right? He kind of put him in a place of solitude. He became a shepherd, right? Which was a very lowly, lonely occupation. You would spend months on end by yourselves where you would not see people, and you're just taking your flock. And the Bible says they took him to the west side or the backside of the desert there. And he was disengaged with the world, disengaged with life. But God was preparing him for the next stage, the next season of his life. So let's jump in here real quick tonight. Let's jump in here and see Moses' disbelief. Moses' disbelief. And we won't read all the scriptures here tonight due to the sake of time. But basically what happens here is we jump in Exodus chapter number 3. And Moses has this famous encounter of the burning bush. He's working, just doing his job. He's leading the flock and all of these things. And all of a sudden he sees this bush that's on fire, which probably in the desert would have been anything too, out of the ordinary. But what he noticed was this bush was on fire, but it wasn't being consumed. And so it caught his attention. So he goes over there and he walks up to this bush, and the bush begins to talk to him, which I'm sure had to have freaked him out. And he steps into this situation, and they say, hey, take your shoes off. You're on holy ground. And he has this encounter with this angel of the Lord, and God begins to speak to him. And God was telling Moses that Moses was going to go and he was going to free his people, the Hebrews, from their Egyptian bondage. But this scared Moses. Again, he had been so disengaged with life and everything that was in it that he had probably lost, all of his pride. He was probably so humble that he didn't believe anything that God would want to use him for anything. And he's in this disbelief here. And so Moses offers up these 5 excuses to God. Number 1, he says, God, who am I? God, who am I? Why in the world would you want to use me? And Moses had so learned about his inadequacies during these 40 stagnant years of his life that he was disengaged with life, that he didn't think that he was anybody special. But God said, I will be with you. And God promised that when the Hebrews came out of Egypt, that they would serve him on the very mountain that he was on, Mount Sinai. Number 2, God said, who are you? Moses said, God, who are you? Moses asked God who he was and who he's to say had sent him. When Moses goes in, he said, hey, I'm here to free you. They're going to be like, okay, who sent you? He's saying, God, who are you? Who's this going to be? And God responded, I am that I am. It's Jehovah, this idea of the self-existent, the great eternal God. God tells him who he is. God told Moses to tell the Hebrews, hey, the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has sent me to deliver you. That would mean something to the Hebrews. Thirdly, he said, they're not going to believe me. Nobody's going to believe me. Moses was in such disbelief in himself and his God that he didn't think that anybody would believe him, that anybody would listen to him, let alone follow him. And so God responded by telling him that he was going to give Moses power, right? And he said, hey, what's that in your hand? And Moses says, my rod. And he said, throw it on the ground. And he threw it on the ground. It became a snake. And he said, pick it up, which I'm out. But he said, pick it up. And so he picks it up, and it turns back into a rod. Moses, he sticks his hand in his clothes. He pulls it out. It's got leprosy. He turns it back in, and it comes clean again. He takes water and he turns it into blood. And God gives him all of these miraculous things to say, hey, the people are going to believe you, not because it's you, Moses, but because of who it is that's sending you. Number 4, he says, God, I don't speak well. In Egypt, Moses had been mighty in his words, but after 40 years in the desert, I'm sure he was hesitant in speaking Egyptian, especially before the Pharaoh. And so God said, hey, I'm going to speak for you. You don't have to worry about that, Moses. He said, Moses, I'm the one that gave you your mouth and your tongue in the first place. I'll take care of that. And so fifthly, Moses, man, he's almost just pleading to God at this point. He says, God, can't somebody else go? God, I'm a nobody. Surely there's somebody else that's got more meaning. Surely there's somebody else that's got more purpose in their lives. And Moses had been so humbled with his life, and he was in such disbelief in his own incapabilities. He just tried to talk God out of even calling him. And God said, hey, I'll send your brother Aaron to go with you. You guys can go together. Aaron will be your spokesman. Don't worry about it. Pastor Stephen Furtick, he said it this way just a couple weeks ago, actually, on Instagram. He made this statement. He said, when Moses said, I can't, God responded, I am. You see, trusting God can be a scary thing. Oftentimes, I think we get content, right, with the stagnant seasons of life, and we almost disengage ourselves. And when God begins to call us out of our comfort zones, we hesitate to believe that God would want to use us. Like, God, there's no way I could serve in the nursery. God, there's no way I could serve in this ministry here. And God, I can't do that. I'm not good with kids. And God, that scares me. No, I can't do that. But I think it's in these moments in life that we must ask God to remind us of who He says we are.